Everybody, my name is Brian Faherty. I work for the Motley Fool down in DC, and here to talk about Args and Kwargs. I want to start with a little bit of why I'm talking on Args and Kwargs. It all started about a year ago, I guess, when I realized I'd been coding Python for a while, and this was all over my code, and I really didn't know what it meant. I used it, I always passed it to Super because I was like, oh, Super expects this, blah, blah, blah. I just throw it around because that's what was needed to make my code work. But I didn't understand why I was doing that. So to explain why, I first have to start with some definitions. And some of the definitions are simple, like basic programming things like, what's the difference between an argument and a parameter? Well, that's usually the two cases where you'll see args and kwargs. An argument is what is passed into the function when you call it. Parameters are what the function expects. The one way I like to remember it, just some little thing, is you call out your arguments. So they're what you pass in, and then parameters are the other one. So what are parameters in Python? Well, in Python you have four types of parameters. Position or keyword, positional only, var positional, and var keyword. So that is your first instance of what star args and star kwargs are. Star args means var positional in this case. Oh, by the way, yeah, it actually has two meanings. So in this case, it's var positional for arguments and var keywords for keywords. Now note, there's positional or keyword. Pretty much every single time you define one, it's going to be positional or keyword. You can kind of ignore that positional only because Python actually has no syntax itself for positional only. Some of the Python language doesn't define it, but like some of the built-in stuff uses positional only, but you can't actually do it. An argument is what you pass in there, and there are two types, keyword arguments and positional arguments. Note that mapping doesn't go straight through, that the number of types of parameters and the number of types of arguments are not the same. So it's not a simple one-to-one mapping. What does that all mean? Well, that's what I was going to show you here with, I did most of this in IPython Notebook, so that way you could see what was going on instead. The first thing to show is, let me know when you can see this. I'm going to try to zoom in. Can you read that? Can everyone read that? Yes. Good? Good. Back row? All right. Good. Okay, so the first thing I started with is, what does variable, var short for variable length arguments, what does that mean? Well, it means that I can pass in any number I want, and it'll be happy with this. So, I did hat again. Yeah, it was not meant to. So I can do that, or I can do this. How much time do I have left? Because I can sit here for the rest of the time. Yeah, it will take as many as you want, which is part of the variable length. It'll take as many as you want. There's probably some limit of like memory allocation somewhere along the line, but I'm not sure of it yet. And I've sat here for a while. So that's what that means, variable. But what are they? What are the objects when you get them? What are args and kwargs? Well, here with a very simple example, just receiving star args and star kwargs, I just called the classes on them. So just declare a couple of variables and passing into the example. And you will see I get a tuple and a dict. So that's the most basic thing where a lot of this can start, is once you receive them using star as the parameter, once they've been passed in and they're received as parameters, they are a tuple and they are a dict. Is there anything else here? There's this one. That one is not used, sorry. So how can I use these? One of the, sorry, I switched computers the last second here. One of the examples of how I can use the advantage of it being a dictionary is I can protect a method, for example. In this case, I have out, which expects words, and it'll just print them. I can then have another method on top of that, which looks at the dictionary that comes in and just lowers it. And then I can pass it to the previous method with this. So what is that operator here now? Because we have the operator twice. We have it in the parameter set as ***, which takes something in and seems to turn it into a dictionary. But then we also have it down here when you're using it as an argument. Well, that actually is, if I can go back to slides, that is actually unpacking. That's what's called in Python. It's called unpacking. Whether it's used on Args or Kwargs, it is called unpacking in this case. I will show logic of what it does later. But yeah, here's just an example of I have a method called outs. I have another method that is over top of it and receives a dictionary, looks at it, and just simply makes sure the to lower is there. This is an example of if you have to protect something, like say you're using a third-party library and you only want to, allow certain things into it. What else do I have? Here's actually an example of this is actually very similar to what Django does, this method right here. Note this raw equals false. This is designed for if you're going to get user input versus your own input, and one's safe to write to the database, it's been sanitized, one hasn't. You can protect it with something like this. And I basically just do logic there based on that. The interesting thing here is it has a default. Now, I can just pass this in. The cool thing about this syntax right here is I pass both of these in as keyword arguments, but because I define it here, it is actually pulling it out of Kwargs. So even though both are passed in and you'd expect both to be in Kwargs, that's not exactly how it works. It actually will try to expand it first and match things on the left side first. It will try to match positional or keyword arguments before it puts everything into var keywords. Okay. Some little trick that I've noticed off of the fact that it puts everything into a dictionary is that you don't actually have to declare dictionaries sometimes. You can use this as a cheap trick to create a dictionary yourself without needing the syntax of quotes around the keys, basically. It saves you a couple of keystrokes, no big deal. And because it's variable, you can go as long as you want with this, and it'll just create dictionaries for you. An interesting thing about *args is that it will take anything. It can even take a generator, and it'll hand those out. The only problem with taking a generator is you can't run it twice. Yeah, it puts those into the list of args, which you can expand again later. So, let's see here. Better example of this. So what actually does it take? Args, it'll actually take anything that is iterable. And in Python, iterable is determined by you have to have a container class that has iter on it, and it needs to return an instance of an iterator. An instance of an iterator has the methods on it of iter and next, And so here I just created an iterator that prints out the values up to 5 basically here. So I create an instance of that, create a little quick thing that takes a variable length parameter, pass it in, and bam. So it doesn't have to be a tuple or anything like that. It just needs to be iterable. You can pass anything into star args as long as Python can iterate through it, because that's what it's going to do in the end. Is it's going to iterate, try to match it to first. If it's passed in as args, it's going to first try to match it to these positional ones up here, and then it's going to take everything else and throw it in star args. So then the question is, what can be keyword arguments? Well, there was an interesting, I tried to take a look at this earlier, and it's very interesting. So I have something here that basically can call to a dictionary and try to just pass anything it gets. So I figured, it works like a dictionary. Python should be okay with this. However, works like a dictionary, create it. It does not. Python will actually tell me some of it, but it will give me an error saying that the keyword args must be a mapping. Now in Python, there's only one type of mapping built in, and that is a dictionary. That is the only thing that is considered a mapping built into dictionary. Maybe if I had fully implemented mapping here, it might work. I don't know for sure. But if you've ever looked at the methods you need to implement a mapping, it's a long list. It's not worth it for most cases. So an interesting thing about star args is used as a parameter here. And sorry if I've messed that up already. Parameter versus argument, even though it looks like the same thing on either side, they are technically different, and it's hard to pronounce them. So if I take I'll take any iterable there, according to star args, turn it into a tuple. What happens when I pass a tuple? It's subtle, and you might not notice it, but right here, if I can highlight it better, it has actually created a tuple and put what I passed it as the first argument. If I had, wait, let me check that that's not, if I had starred this, it'll work that way. It is nice to know that you can expand right inline, although I personally consider that very confusing to read, because it's hard to match the star to where it ends, but you can do interesting things like that. So now, here's another interesting case. Question is, what will happen here? If you note, I've got an argument, positional or keyword argument here. And yes, this is what I was talking about, is this is to show that any argument you declare, like it, there we go. Like it says here, this is straight out of the Python docs on positional only, that however, Python has no syntax for defining this. Positional or keyword, so every single one you declare in that parameter line is positional or keyword. Whether or not you give it a default value does not change whether it can be positional or keyword. It will always be that way. It will always be positional or keyword. So what will happen when I am basically assigning the value twice? I'm trying to assign hello to alpha. But if you look over here, I'm also trying to assign to alpha goodbye. So the nice thing, at least, is Python just throws you an error, which is actually pretty convenient. because I don't know what you would expect at that point based off the way Python should work. But this example is really to illustrate the fact that it is positional or keyword, and that's why it can't determine what to do here. Is one doesn't override the other. It's both. So what do I have here? I do not remember what. So here's an interesting one. What happens when I take a dictionary and pass it into and use the operator that's designed to expand a tuple or a sequence? Well, it's going to iterate through it and just pull out the keys. Just like if you were to iterate through a dictionary, you would get that. And that's what it's doing there. So that is an interesting thing that can happen if you do go to pass in keyword arguments and you forget. Yes?
What if you did mydict.iterItem?
It will iterate through that.
With 4 elements.
So iter items. There you go. So it gets a list because it gets go away. So right now, Args has become a tuple of 2 tuples. And that's what you would get if you just ran that, basically. An iterable with these values in them. So it is nice, though, that it maps down to basic Python functionality of just iterating through them. So here was another example of, what was I trying to do? Another one that's kind of undefined here, where I'm trying to, if I take a variable positional arguments, variable position parameter, and I have a keyword or positional parameter as well, what happens when I try to define 2 to it? Luckily, again, Python catches me and tells me get multiple values, which is an unpacking error. So if I know now that keyword arguments is a dictionary that can be expanded, the question is, how can I use that to my advantage? One way you can use it to your advantage is, say you have a method that has a keyword there. Now, sometimes you want to override that, so in this case, the secure SSL will secure equals SSL. So say by default, this always needs some security, right? And it passes in a bunch of other arguments and does stuff with it. But in this case, I say you need some sort of security, right? So say you have some other method that needs to calculate or figure out which type of security you should use, HTTPS, SSL, something like that. You can't always just pass in a value like this, because if I have it defined as none, in this case, I had my code set to throw me an error, which it does, saying I requires some parameter there. Now, because I know that a dictionary can be expanded to fit any of these keywords, I can use that by always passing in a dictionary. In this case, I pass in an empty dictionary, and it just is happy with it because it maps nothing to secure. Then, if I just have something where I check if secure is there, throw it in that dictionary, and call the method, it won't throw me an error. The advantage to this is it'll allow you to always have that one last call, and I won't have to put like a try catch or an if statement around there with 2 different calls to optional security or something. I could also put all of my parameters inside that dictionary. Cut. and it will it'll work just like that. So that way you could just have a dictionary lying around with your defaults in it and update it as needed and just expand it. And note the difference there. Okay. So going back to simple one. So here is something with an example of all types in it, or seemingly all types. It looks like I have it looks like a positional only, but that does not exist. So here you have two keyword or positional or keyword pairs. That means because it is positional or keyword, I can pass in 1, 2. And you see there, I get 1 and 2. I can always do, I think I can do 2. No, that'll assign 2 values to alpha. So if you don't have a default, it'll have to come first in. If you try something like this, for example, it won't work. Thanks to Python giving you an error, as I showed before. But I can always do this because they are both positional or keyword. And so the thing is, the mapping is the important part. The fact that you can pass in things as keyword or positional, and both of these can map to your positional or keyword only thing. You'll notice that with some built-in functions that have the positional only thing, such as print, I believe it is. I believe it's something like this. Yeah. So some built-in functions like this won't allow you to expand. This has to do with it taking the positional only style stuff. So you don't have to worry about your code creating this issue because you can't declare positional only. Let's see here. Sorry. Oh, it'd give me the type error? Is it absolute value?
So right here you're doing like print and then a tuple, and you're trying to expand a star.
Oh, there we go. You're right. It's fixed. Okay. All right. So I actually rushed through that way quicker than I expected. So, any questions? Or the nice thing is I have the interpreter right here. So, are there examples people are thinking of?
General comment. I feel like I see Kwargs in a lot of code places where it makes more sense to just have a dictionary parameter. And stylistically, it's problematic because you're not really getting that self-documentation that you get with the variable. So you've obviously thought about this a lot. I was wondering if you could comment on that.
Well, you can actually name Kwargs something else. So if you are expecting a dictionary that like you want to map it all down to a dictionary, you could name something Kwargs or Kwargs something else to make it easier to use. Args and Kwargs, they're just convention that we all call them that. They're not actually reserved words. It's the syntax in front of them, the splat or splat splat, that makes them special. Okay. Okay.
All you know is that you can do anything. Like,
Yeah.
for example, like in pandas, we pass these in like way down in the call stack to like read CSV. It takes a billion parameters.
Okay.
Like the user facing is like just a gigantic list of like actual arguments. Like it's sort of so eventually it gets turned into a dict, which is then flattened into some internal mode.
Uh-huh.
But for user facing APIs, it's horrible.
No, yeah.
It's totally useful, but just in terms of like, even if you were to name it, whatever, this expands to a couple or whatever.
Yeah, I agree with users allowing anything in can be dangerous, but you could have some protection later down the line to check for that.
Yes, I know beautiful Stu has some stuff as well, but things like URLs.
Uh-huh.
So then in certain cases, it can be useful.
Yeah. But I mean, if you're trying to make sure that whatever is the underlying thing, you keep whatever arguments are. I think it's very helpful when you're trying to wrap something else necessarily, because then you can keep those and you can take out whatever you need from them. You can use it as a dictionary, pushing and popping, stuff like that, or sorry, deleting records, or you can actually define what you need to take out, like right on that line. So. Yes, defining an easy API for someone to use probably wins over that. So there's something.
So I've noticed that in token expressions, most of the calls are with Args forms instead of like pandas leaning toward writing it out loud, saying upfront. So I wonder if anybody here has attended a talk by Brian, a Benjamin who writes book reviews to okay, and knows why they made this kind of choice. Where almost every time I do anything with vocabulary tools, we talk to it to figure out what's allowed in this art form thing to draw anything.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat the last part of that question?
So almost any time you, so you know, bouquet is a plotting kind of tool, like JavaScript based thing. So their function calls are almost exclusively documented with art form.
Uh-huh.
So I wonder if that's like a design choice on their part to do that somehow. That seems to me inconvenient, but is there like a tactical reason?
I don't know why they define their documentation that way. Sorry.
So I'm a beginner programmer, so I can comment on that, but one place where I found this useful, for example, in OpenCV, you want to run some algorithm, and it takes a certain set of parameters, but then you use a different flavor of the algorithm. So for example, there's a ransack flag, and then you need completely different set of parameters, so it could be a different number of parameters. So it was useful in the first place that it was a dictionary, because you just passed a different dictionary and the flag like ransack or some other way to.
Another thing I found useful for Kwargs is like taking Kwargs in when I take a like JSON from another API and say it's camel cased and we use everything as snake case in Python. I will actually sometimes use that to iterate through all the keys and change them quickly into different case just for convenience. And I can do that quickly using receiving star Kwargs. That's easier to do it that way.
One place where it's really great to have star Args is not just Args, not Kwargs as much, is when you want to accept a list and you want to avoid the programming error of when you need to pass a list as one item, accidentally just passing the item. So I know I just wrote a decorator that takes in for an API the required scope. So like you have to have this scope to access the API. And so most of the time you just have one scope, and so you string, like, can see user data. But when you want to pass multiple, you want to be passing multiple things, and so you, instead of mandating a list there, and then you have to remember, okay, when I really should be passing a string, I have to pass a list that contains one string. You can use *args and pass just as many strings as you want, and then it will, like, you just avoid that programming error.
Yeah, the thing that I find interesting about that is this style of error that I have right here, where it's like if you expect it and you forget a star, or where I had the dictionary and I start it once, you can kind of step on your own feet that way. And those ones are really hard to debug because they're both iterable on both sides, so it gets really confusing.
The only where you would never be passing anything in programmatically.
Okay.
So like here you're passing in like this tuple 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
The packing and unpacking with star and double star, is
Spanish.
that something special with parameters, or would you use that in other areas of Python code, and when?
So the interesting thing, that's actually a good question. So let me take that here, and there's a fairly simple answer to that. You can't. You can only use it, it only works on arguments. Or on the parameters as collecting it.
So you
yeah.
use it in normal expressions, but only if it's connected to that.
Yeah, only if it's inside either a method call or declaration. It just doesn't work elsewhere.
You're gonna also use it for like advanced unpacking. Can I show you?
Yeah, sure. That's why I like IPython is.
Like, you should do something like.
Oh, I see. For assignment.
Yeah.
Yes, you can use it there. That's right.
Okay, no.
Oh. Yeah, that's right. There are some slight differences for this for Python 3, including the fact that you can actually do keyword only parameters in 3. But again, like if I were to sit here and be like, oh, but this in 2, this in 3, that'd be miserable. I think you can do it on the last one, actually. Can you do it on the last one in 2? Oh, I thought you could do it on. Yeah, that's a newer feature. There was one last thing I wanted to show, a useful tool for discovering this stuff. It's on inspect. It's get args spec on a method. We'll show you exactly what it takes. And the misleading thing I think about this is the fact that it says args here and not Kwargs too. It's trying to imply that they're only arguments, but that it's never that. It's just, I think it's a slight misname of it and leads you astray a little bit. But yeah, it's a useful tool I found. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you guys.